All right, how was lunch? Yeah? Okay, I'll take that as a good sign. I fully recognize that this is a difficult spot to speak in because it's right after lunch and some of you may be in a food coma. So if that's the case, feel free to nod off. I will not judge you, I promise. I also know that all of you are working and have taken time out of your day, so if you need to check email or tweet stuff or whatever you're doing, certainly not going to be offended by that either. But really appreciate everybody taking time out. I know there's a number of different tracks and sessions going today, so appreciate you taking some time to spend with me here this afternoon. I'm going to talk for maybe 15, 20 minutes, give you some time for Q&A, and certainly give you enough time to make it over to the next session. So as we start, the premise of today is talking about 5 marketing predictions for the next 5 years. Everybody loves to forecast and make some assumptions about the future. So as a business, we run an annual report where we'll look at things and what technologies are trending, especially around consumer engagement. And this is what we put together for 2018. And obviously, we're going to be ramping into 2019 here very shortly. Before we start, I do want to just take a moment, ask you to follow along. Feel free to connect with me or follow Amarsis on LinkedIn, on Twitter. I would rather not speak at you, but speak with you. So please feel free to join into the conversation here today as well. And a little bit about me before we get started. As Dwayne said, I'm the Director of Partnerships at Amarsis. We're the largest independent marketing platform in the globe. We've been selling in the US for about 3 years now, so we're lesser known within the North American market than where we might be found in Europe and Asia and other markets around the world. But certainly excited to be here today. We've been working with hundreds of Magento clients all around the world. I've had the privilege of working in the Magento ecosystem for over 6 years now, and have spent a career, and prior to that, working as a merchant, like many of you in the room, on both the B2C and B2B side. So happy to speak with any of you afterwards about whether it's general marketing technology or anything at our table down in the hall. So certainly please feel free to come to look for us. I will preface that by saying our table does not have anything on it because our stuff never showed up. So look for a generic black tablecloth and you'll find us there. So to really dive in, really want to talk about the world and what we've seen in the past, where we're going in the future. And many of you, even as individual consumers, have experienced this. And for a very long time, as a merchant, merchants have had the ability to control the channels and the access points that consumers have been able to engage with them in. 10, 20, 50 years ago, you had a store, you were open maybe 6, 7 days a week, sometimes 5 days a week, from 9 a.m. to 8 p.m. or whatever that particular set of hours were. And as a merchant, you controlled the brand experience. You controlled the voice of your brand being out there in the marketplace. You controlled how consumers and when consumers engage with you. Obviously, as many of you know, as likely all of you know, the world has changed. And where we live today is more of a consumer-centric society where the consumer makes the decision. They decide what they're shopping for, when they're shopping for it, how they're shopping for it, when it's going to be delivered, and ultimately setting the expectations of what that consumer experience is going to be like. And obviously, as we've moved and certainly changed the trend over the last 10 years, the consumer is now in control. So what I want to talk about today is how a merchant and how as a participant in the Magento ecosystem, you can start to take back a little bit more of that control and start to guide and shape your business into the future. So as we look at some of the most valuable brands out there today, certainly don't need to name these for you, things have changed. In the last 10 years, none of these were in the top 5 valuable brands out there. And it's pretty interesting to look at what's changed in the last 10 years to really drive them to this dominant position in terms of whether it's market cap, revenue, and so forth. And as we really sit and experience that, it's really about data. And what makes these brands so valuable is they've learned to harness data, and they've got a ton of it. And because of the tremendous amount of data they have, they've now become very valuable because, as we've learned, data has become tremendously valuable to brands, and to be able to exploit that to drive conversion, to drive whatever that next best step is in that consumer life cycle. So as we look at that, ultimately, data will play a trend as we go forward through our conversation today. So one of the first predictions I'll talk about today is that first-party data is ultimately going to become and is our most valuable asset. So as we look at first-party data, I think it's an interesting stat to throw up here, and I'll pull up a few other elements around here as we start to talk through this. So as a society globally, we generate 2.5 quintillion bytes of data every day. So to give you some context, a billion is a 2, a 5, and then 9 zeros behind it. This is a 2 and a 5 and 17 zeros behind it. So as a society, we're generating tons and tons of data every day. And as brands or as agencies working with brands, it's interesting to understand what are we doing with that data. Do you have a strategy in place to collect that data today? If not, what else are you doing to help subsidize that? As we look at the data that's out there, one of the things I would say is, whether it's tomorrow or Monday when you get back into the office after this event, if you don't have a strategy to collect first-party data, you should. So sit down and start to understand what you should be doing to start capturing that data, and then ultimately leveraging that to continue to grow your brand and to help drive that consumer conversation forward, and ultimately leverage that to your maximum capacity. Looking at our second prediction is really understanding the consumers, what they're doing with that data, and ultimately who owns that data. So as a consumer, you'd sit there and think, well, if it's my personal demographic data or if it's my search data, that should be mine. And as a brand, if you're the one dropping cookies on your website or dropping cookies on their browser rather, and following them throughout the site and understanding their experience as they go through, you ultimately want to think that you control that data. And obviously, as we've continued to grow as a global economy, things like GDPR and new privacy regulation and legislation in California and other markets are continuing to emerge to really help protect consumers, but also start to set some guidelines around who owns that data and what you're going to do with it. So as a brand, what are you going to do with that data? How are you understanding where your consumers are, what they're looking at, and ultimately then leveraging that to help them take their next best step in that journey. As we look at this, obviously location is an interesting point to bring in. So as a merchant or as an agency working with merchants, you can certainly capture a number of different things throughout the consumer life cycle. You can capture demographic data, you can capture transactional data, but understanding the location is also an interesting channel to help identify not only who your customers are, but what they might do next. So from a location perspective, it's certainly interesting to track that and then pull that into all of the data that you're looking at and analyzing to make sure that from a next best step, understanding, is this where the person's normally located? Are they on a business trip? Are they on vacation? How does that factor into the buying process? Are you sending dynamic content to them so they can understand, okay, if I'm in Florida today, I probably might want to see an ad looking at shorts, flip-flops, and relevant things, versus being in Alaska where maybe snowshoes and parkas and other elements are certainly more relevant based on that location. So location is certainly a valuable tool to use when identifying your customers and what the next best piece of communication might be to send to them. So as we look at this and understand data as a whole, what really makes these the 5 companies that we looked at earlier, whether it's Google, Amazon, et cetera, incredibly valuable is that they have a tremendous amount of data. If you look at the AI algorithms that are out there today, there's some really great algorithms. You can go get free AI machine learning algorithms on the internet right now if you want to. But if you don't have data to support that, and not only data, but good data and enough data, the algorithms just simply aren't going to work, or it's not going to give you enough relevant information to really drive that conversation forward and make that consumer convert or whatever the next best step is again. So ultimately, as you capture data, and as we look at these 5 large conglomerates and these large global brands, they kind of have a foothold on the market now with the data that they have. And I think going forward into the future, what we'll see is these smaller independent brands or brands that might be part of a larger buying group will be able to take the data that they have and broker that on the market, maybe sell anonymized data and be able to pull that data in going forward, so that way they can start to leverage that data and make their AI more intelligent as well, and again, driving that business process forward. And as we continue to look at not only the data that you have, it's again leveraging that to make the consumer have a much more personalized experience. So our fifth prediction as we go forward is looking at augmented reality. So just by a quick show of hands, this is more geared towards the ladies in the room, how many of you have been to Sephora or have engaged with their AR-based makeup experience in the store? Couple? Okay. And some of you that might be homeowners or obviously have apartments of some sort, there's a number of different furniture and paint stores and things like that that have also provided AR-based experiences for looking at paint colors, looking at furniture fit, and understanding the full environment around them to place those in and ultimately, again, create that more personalized experience. So you can see the couch in your living room, you're ultimately going to have a better likelihood of making that purchase and driving that forward. So we fully believe that AR will certainly have a long-standing, at least in the near foreseeable future, impact on how we convert, how we go through that buying experience. And as brands continue to embrace that, obviously relevant brands, it'll certainly make an impact to that business as well. So as we kind of wrap up the general conversation here, looking at the 5 predictions that we have, obviously there's a number of different things that will really pull together this consumer experience. Obviously, to try to take on all 5 at one time can certainly be a challenge for many brands. I realize that many merchants out there or agencies out there are working with smaller teams. So understanding what are you doing today, what's working well, I think is an initial first step, as I mentioned before, is creating that first-party data collection strategy. If you don't have one in place, certainly start to dive into that. If you do have one in place, that you're capturing that data, what are you doing with it? And ultimately, how can you drive that to create a more personalized and seamless consumer experience? So I will now take some time for any questions or comments, any experiences that you guys have had that might be relevant as well. Okay, fairly quiet. All right, well, thank you very much. Certainly appreciate everybody taking some time out of their day to spend with us. As we transition out, certainly feel free to stop by Amarsis, many of the other sponsors that are here, and ask, certainly dive in, ask us any of your Magento community-related questions. Certainly happy to address that. So thank you very much.